background kind of with, the financial knowledge to understand interest rates and options and things, for loans and things of that nature? No, I did not. I just knew that I wanted to go to college and I didn't have any other money, and that this was the money that would, let me go to college. And so I was pretty much blind and willing to sign whatever.
Almost the same thing. I was 17 actually when I started college. I had no clue. I was the first person in my household, not in my family, but the first person in my household to actually go to college. And I had somebody there with me, but they didn't know what we were looking at either. We just saw like Dr. Williams said, there's just a whole stack of paperwork to fill out and to sign, and I basically just signed my life away, uh, just so I can get into school, not knowing that it would be even more expensive because I was going to a private HBCU, going to Clark Atlanta, so it was even more expensive than if I went out of town or went out of state or went to Georgia State or to a public university. So I just stepped in blind because I wanted to be a part of that experience, and I wanted to go to college to make my family proud. So I didn't really care what I was signing. I just went.
Mhm.
So it sounds like, especially for you, since you went to that HBCU, that Biden's plan would be super helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing what actually comes out of this, and if he's able to actually get something passed to be able to help people to get some kind of relief.
So have you been able to keep up your loan payments and keep them in good standing over time?
Over sometimes I can be up to date, sometimes you be behind. I have been trying my best to keep from having to pay it all or pay the big payments because my student loans are so high. My payments are really big, and so I've been trying to like do forbearance or deferments. I even thought about re-enrolling in school just so I can go to in-school deferment, just so I wouldn't have to pay that money.
Mhm.
I mean, you don't realize how much undertaking it is for student loans. You'll be paying it um, until you become the president, like Barack.
Mhm. Yeah, I deferred for a good portion of time after college my student loans, and I think maybe that, not I think, but probably in the back of my mind, I will admit that those being a full-time student, deferring loans was part of the game plan, which is, in part how I accumulated so many degrees. But I have, since I've been in repayment, I have been able to keep up with the payments. Um, so I haven't had to take advantage of any of the freeze right now because I don't want the extra interest to accumulate. But while I was in deferment, of course, interest did continue to accumulate and really increase that principal balance that I'm paying on now.
We have a question in the chat. Someone asked if you guys could share how much your monthly payment is currently.
My current monthly payment, I'm on an income, like a graduated repayment plan, and I'm currently paying about $330 per month.
Yeah, I think mine is like a little bit more than that. Is at like 552 or something like that. I haven't had a chance to take advantage of some of the uh, payment assistance that they have available right now, but it's about $500.
So how much have paying back on student loans affected you since leaving school? Have you had to put off certain things or really, restructure maybe your plans on how you wanted to go about your life since having to, calculate in paying off those loans?
After those first 6 months passed, where you had that little leeway, I mean, things were a lot different. It wasn't you didn't have, you don't have that freedom as you would think. And for myself personally, I didn't go directly into my field when I graduated. I was completely working in a different field. I have a degree in education, but I'm working in accounting. I didn't, so I wasn't even making the amount of money that I thought I was going to make to be able to take care of that and to pay everything. So it was a little tight for me.
When I first got out of school, like I said, I kind of consistently delayed paying it back by being a full-time student for so long. Kind of, and then when I did get into working, Then I was enrolled in programs that qualified as full time, like working on a doctorate, which took me almost 9 years. So I mean, I really like milked the deferral time frame. So it didn't really impact me like that. And now, I'm able to make the payments. But, I do worry about long term. I mean, I'm going to be paying this forever, and so if I don't get some type of lump sum windfall to pay off student loans, I'm really going to pay this until, my time on this earth is up.
I feel the same way. That's why I made reference to the president. I was like, he didn't finish paying his student loans until after he became the president of the
Right,
United States. I mean, they
right,
were paying their student loans off until they got into that, place to where they could
right.
afford to pay it, And I feel like that's kind of how they trap you when you're at a young age. You're 17 years old, 18 years old,
Hmm.
and you get trapped doing something that you're going to be paying off until you get either a huge lump sum of money, you become rich or pretty wealthy, or, until you get to old age and you just paid it down.
Right.
So over time, since you've been paying back your loans, has your loan agency been helpful with providing you with information of payment options?
They have been, if I call an ask. Nothing has been volunteered. No information has been volunteered. But if I hear about something like this, or I see something online and call and ask, they are helpful at that point. But otherwise, no.
I periodically receive an email from Navient, formerly known as Sally Mae, concerning opportunities to do maybe like a 2 month forbearance, or do a 6 month forbearance to kind of put it off to help me from having to pay it for that period of time. But I mean, that's few and far in between. It could be you know 6 months in between each email from them, concerning what opportunities they have to help you out.
If any, how much has your loan increased since you started paying it back due to interest?
To be completely honest, I have not even looked to see how much it has increased. I hadn't seen an increase in my monthly payment, and so I hadn't really paid attention to how much the interest or anything has changed over the years. So I couldn't honestly answer that question.
I will say that while I was in the loan forbearance period, I accumulated a lot of interest that was capitalized. So I would say like 15 to 20,000 ish maybe. But I will say that since I've been repaying the loan over maybe 5 or so years now, that principal balance doesn't budge.
Hmm.
That's good.
It
Um,
doesn't budge.
how much has the recent COVID relief bill benefited you guys?
I haven't taken advantage of it. Luckily, I haven't needed to, and I didn't want to delay anything that was going to cause additional interest to capitalize. So I've just kept paying.
It's helped me out a lot because not having to pay the student loans opens up room for you to do other things that you feel like you need to do, whether it's a necessity or not. It opens you up to not have to pay it. Unfortunately, once the pandemic is over and all of this is said and done, you have to go back to your normal process of paying your student loans. So, a lot of people are going to take advantage of it when they don't have to, and
Mm-hmm.
going to be in for a rude awakening the same way people have taken advantage of the rent moratorium or whatever. Once it's over with, what are you going to do about all that rent that you haven't paid, or your student
Right.
loans that you haven't paid? I mean, it's helped me since we started, because a period of time came to when I was not able to get my tax returns because it was going towards my student loans. It was automatically taking it going towards my student loans, and it didn't happen this year because of the pandemic and everything that they froze. So it's kind of been helpful in that way.
So if you guys could go back in time, rewind the clock, and do it all over again when it came to paying for school, what do you feel like you'd have done differently?
read, read, study, and
Yeah.
I would have probably talked to somebody who already had student loans or was already at the
Mhm.
university. But when you go to orientation at school, the people who are doing your orientation, they're students just like you. So they don't,
Mhm.
they're not thinking about telling you about student loans or telling you about, ways to help you pay. They're all telling you about, they preach to us, school spirit and getting into, you know, the social life of the university. But when it came down to financial things, they're in the same predicament that, we were in
Mhm.
coming in as freshmen. They were in that same predicament as sophomores and juniors and seniors. So I think I would, seek out somebody there, maybe on the staff or in the financial office or administration that would be able to help me better understand what I was actually getting into.
Mhm. I agree with everything he said, and had I been armed with that kind of knowledge, I would have taken the least amount of loans necessary versus a lot of the extra that's offered. Because often what you qualify for, you may not need all of that, but as students, you're looking at various expenses, so you kind of take what's being offered. But I would have taken the least necessary and tried to get funds in other ways to kind of supplement so that I wouldn't have such a large student loan debt when it was all over. In addition to that, you know, I probably would have not taken loans on subsequent degrees. Um, trying to find other ways to finance those, just things of that nature.
Okay.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of what Dr. Williams was saying, I probably would have not taken the full amount of the loans that were offered to me as well. Your whole mindset is when you see that credit on your account of what you
Mhm.
have left over, and that's coming back to you as a student refund, and you got books to pay for, and you got all these
Right.
other expenses or whatever. You're looking at it like, man, let's go. I'm rich. I'm
Right.
17. I got $5,000 in my pocket to go towards whatever, and you take the full amount of that loan because you feel like I can. It's allotted to me. I don't have to pay it back
Right.
right now, and you can wait until God knows when to pay it back. I'm be in school for 4 years, 6 years, or however long, and you set yourself up for failure because you could be using that.
Mhm.
You could not take that full amount or take the full amount and use it to actually go put back into repaying some stuff.
Exactly.
Well, thank you guys both for sharing your experience and all of that. I think that insight is very helpful, especially when it comes to paying back and what it looks like, after college when we get that reality check, right? I think it's
Oh yeah,
this panel has been real insightful for that for all of us who will be graduating soon. So thank you both so much for sharing your experiences. We really appreciate it.
Thank
you're
you for
welcome. Thank you
having
for
me.
having us.
So next we're going to move on to have Mr. Allen speak as well. He's going to talk a little bit more about how we all can be advocates for student loan debt relief. And I'm going to share my screen again. So just give me a moment to pull that up and then we will keep on going.
Well, hey everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Thanks to Georgia State University for putting on this very important forum. My name is Alan College. I've been fighting for student loan justice since 2005, actually. So it has been 16 years in this struggle. And I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Tamika, Bree, Talisha. They have been incredibly helpful. I'm glad to announce that our petition is now within about 3,000 signatures of reaching 1 million signatures. So thanks very much for that. And I'll talk about that a bit in a minute. But I want to step back for a minute, guys. I've heard all the stories, and what I've heard from Anthony, and I think was it Barnaby. Very typical stories. People go to college. They trust their college. They trust certainly that the government's not going to steer them wrong. And everybody growing up, you go to college to get a degree, and so when it comes time to sign for your loan papers, you don't even read the fine print. You just sign whatever is put in front of you. I mean, that's just sort of obvious. And so, student loan borrowers are in many ways kind of in a state of duress when they sign on the dotted line. And so that's just what it is. But let's take a step back for a minute. This country was founded on the principle of freedom. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, many of the other founders, they were being screwed under predatory debt to the king, to British banks, British merchants, etc. And in fact, the state of Georgia, believe it or not, was founded originally as a refuge for imprisoned debtors. Some people don't realize that, but it's true. And when they wrote the Constitution, and it turns out to be very important for student loans, the founding fathers, when Congress its powers, turns out they called for a uniform system of bankruptcies, ahead of the power to declare war, ahead of the power to raise an army and print money and create a judiciary. That is how important that the founding fathers felt the bankruptcy protections were for the people. Well, here we are 300 years later, and student loans, both federal and private, they've been stripped uniquely of these bankruptcy protections. And nobody wants to file for bankruptcy. It's a terrible thing to have to do. But the founders realized early on that you have to have some kind of a check on the lenders, whether they're private lenders or, in this case, whether it's the federal government, to keep the lending system fair, to keep good faith in the lending contract, and to keep prices rational, prices of whatever's being bought with the lent money. Well, this student loan exception to their wisdom really proves their wisdom in spades. They removed bankruptcy protections from student loans starting in the 70s, but it was a fait accompli in 1998. Then they took bankruptcy protections away from private student loans in 2005. And we can see a very close correlation between the price of college, the amount of student loan debt. It just starts to go through the roof when this fundamental constitutional protection was taken away uniquely from student loans. And by the way, I should say, in 1965, when the federal program was started, President Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he declared that these loans would be free of interest. Well, here we are, 50 plus years later, and about $100 billion a year in interest alone is clicked off on the backs of the citizens. $100 billion a year is lent out. And as a nation where in the year 2000, which was not that long ago, right, we owed maybe 150 billion in student loans. Today, we are way more than 10 times that. We're closing in on $2 trillion today. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, guys. Y'all are probably a little younger than me. But we're in uncharted territory here. The numbers are outrageous. Tylisha mentioned earlier that the state of Georgia, the people of Georgia, owe nearly double the entire state budget of Georgia in student loan debt. And most of that is owed to the federal government. But there are other ways to look at this. With all the student loan debt in the state of Georgia, you could buy every farm, every piece of machinery on that farm, every building, everything, every farm, peanut, peaches, you name it, every farm in Georgia you could buy. And you would still have $20 billion left over. So at what point do you have to go, wait a minute, something's gone horribly wrong here? Well, I think that's where we're at now, guys. And it's not just Georgia. This is the entire country. Georgia is the worst in the country, which is kind of interesting to me. I don't know why that should be, but many states are terrible. In fact, there's really only 2 states that are sort of within what I would consider to be sort of rational levels, and that's Hawaii and Alaska. But they're sort of outliers because they're very small states and they have very high state budgets. So, and here's maybe a number that's even worse. In 2000, the people who graduated in 2004, the default rate for those folks was 40%. But they were only borrowing about 1/3 of what's being borrowed today. Today, people are borrowing on average $39,000, $40,000, and that's for undergrad. So what will the default rate be for everybody right now walking around with student loans? Well, we know that before this pandemic, 80% of all borrowers were either unable to make payments or they were paying and paying and paying, like Anthony and I think Barnaby. And their balances were going up, not down. So, I mean, that is pointing towards 80% of all student loan borrowers before the pandemic, probably headed for very tough times, probably headed for default. So even assuming a 75% default rate, the default rate for subprime home mortgages, which was, I think most people would agree, a pretty failed lending system, the default rate for those loans was 18%, 1/8, so 1 out of 5. So I think it's not even controversial to say at this point that the default rate for student loans is going to be something like 4 times higher than that. And we're talking pre-pandemic. So it doesn't look good, folks. I don't know what to tell you. But, the good news is, number one, take a broader view. At the end of World War II, most monetary systems, certainly in Europe, were basically non-existent. I mean, lending systems fail from time to time in not only US, but world history. It's just kind of the way it goes. And so you don't need to freak out about it too much if you sort of take the larger view. But certainly this lending system, by all rational metrics, is at the point of, I'd say, catastrophic failure. And I mean, that's just a fact. I point to the removal of bankruptcy protections as being a key part of this. And, there's a lot of fingers of blame to point. I don't think it's really too constructive to point the finger, Democrats, Republicans, etc. We're a nonpartisan group. But right now, here today, the thing that I see, first of all, for the first 16 years of our existence, we were fighting very moderately for only the return of bankruptcy protections. So if, things go horribly awry, you take the ultimate step of filing, you go to a judge. The judge says, well, okay, you owe $100,000. All right. Tell you what, I'll discharge that. I'll discharge this, maybe keep you on the hook for whatever, on how much you can pay. That's what the founders wanted. That's the system that has worked very well in this country for many years. And at a minimum, that's what's got to be returned to student loans. It's just got to. But for the political intransigence in Washington, D.C., certainly over the past 16 years that I've been doing this, hopefully not much more going forward, I think this probably would have been done a long time ago, and I wouldn't be here today talking to you. But the establishment in Washington, D.C. is very strong. We've all seen the political gridlock. And at this point, my group, as of the beginning of the pandemic, we began calling not for the return of bankruptcy protections, but rather for the cancellation of all federally owned student loans. I think it's gotten to the point where we sort of want to be talking about a jubilee. Now, when you borrow money, you have to pay it back. That's always been true. But in this current environment that we find ourselves in, I think most conventional wisdom is out the window. I mean, we just threw trillions of dollars out into the country in the form of pandemic stimulus. All of that stuff added to the national debt, and a bunch of it was in the form of loans that do not need to be repaid. All of that added to the national debt. We'll have to raise taxes. At some point, we'll have to pay for that. Well, with federal student loans, which are about 87% of all student loans, the taxpayers paid for these loans many years ago, and they didn't pay much. They did not pay $1.8 trillion. But we're in uncharted territory, and Joe Biden pledged to eliminate student loans, and he also pledged to return bankruptcy protections. So far, now we're not even up to his first 100 days, but so far, I think it's pretty clear that we need to put a lot more pressure on President Biden. Now, right now, politically, the issue seems to be a D versus R thing where, you know, the Democrats, Elizabeth Warren, probably Cory Booker, that you mentioned, many other Democrats are calling for both bankruptcy protections and loan cancellation. But we're seeing on the Republican side, maybe not so much. But folks, I'm here to tell you, this is a nonpartisan issue. Of all the people in Georgia that owe this money, probably 55% are either Republicans or independent. Around maybe 47 or so percent are Democrats, 43% Republicans, and the middle are independent. So this is not a partisan issue. And quite frankly, I really would hope that that the Governor Kemp, to look at the numbers, because quite frankly, I don't think that even he knows. I don't think the governors of Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, Indiana, North South Carolina, I don't think the governors of any of those states realize that their states owe more than their entire state budgets in student loan debt. I just don't think that they know. So my hope right now is that we can make this a bipartisan issue, because not much good gets done when you have this partisan divide. And even, you know, with a democratically controlled Congress, you know, we had a democratically controlled Congress in 2006, and they couldn't even return bankruptcy protections to student loans. So my true hope is that the governors of all those states that I mentioned and others, regardless of their political party, will say, okay, wait a minute, Mr. President, cancel these loans. It's time. This is just ridiculous. Because remember, almost nobody is paying on their loans right now. Before this pandemic, very few people were. My guess is probably less than 65%. Whenever this repayment moratorium is put back in, or is expired, and people are supposed to resume paying on their loans, I don't think very many people are going to pay. So I think this lending system is, quite frankly, vanishing into a mist of illegitimacy as we speak. And I know it's hard to hear those words. You know, it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? Well, as I said, take a step back. It's not our fault. It's not the borrower's fault. In many ways, it's nobody's fault. It's just kind of what happens from time to time. But we have to push Joe Biden. We have to push the governors of all the affected states that I mentioned. In fact, we should be pushing all governors everywhere. It's time to remove this debt from existence. It just is. Now, going forward, you know, maybe we can still have student loans, but with bankruptcy protections in place. That would be a lot more reasonable, a lot more in keeping with what the founders mentioned. I personally think that we should get rid of student loans. And, you know, like many other countries on this planet, we can find a way to educate our citizens for no debt. You know, it's not that hard to do. I would like to see the states directing the funding to colleges, where today it goes right overhead in the form of these federal student loans directly to the colleges. I just don't think that model works very well. So I'd like to see a more state-friendly financing model going forward. But, you know, I don't know what the future holds. Nobody does. Not Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, not anybody. But what I do know now very strongly is that the current student loan system, at a minimum, has got to get bankruptcy returned. And at this point, I think it makes a lot more sense to simply be done with the debt. It will do nothing but help the country, won't add to the national debt. And on that note, yes, our petition started the national conversation that we're hearing about right now. We started this thing in March of last year. We were a voice in the wilderness until in November, when Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer appropriated, or I should say, embraced the concept of canceling student loans by executive order. It really is kind of a magic bullet. And so, again, I want to thank everybody who helped make that a reality. I can only hope and pray that we can get this lending system under control, hopefully with the help of governors like Brian Kemp and Ron DeSantis, Kay Ivey, and others. I think this, and I think it has gotten to the point where the governors really have to stand up now at this point and stick up for their people. So thank you very much.
Yeah. and definitely make sure you get in contact with your local representatives. Talk to your friends about this. Talk to your families about this, because people think that this is an individual issue when this is an issue that really impacts everyone at all levels. So definitely, talk to others and make the changes needed in your own life to help advocate for student loan debt relief. So are there any questions that anyone has before we wrap up? If anybody would like to ask anything or have any comments that they would like to say, now is your time.
Hey, I have a question. Back on one of the earlier slides, there was a note there around something I think that President Biden proposed around eliminating debt for people making up to a certain annual salary. Is that like an all or nothing thing? So like if you make over that annual salary, do you not get any student loan forgiveness?
Yeah. It seems like it's an all or nothing thing.
I'll have to look into that. That seems really unfair, I guess.
Yeah, and it seems as though too, when he was running, he started out with the 50,000. He has flat out come out and said that he can't do that. It's gone down to, I think it's like 10,000 now, but it seems like every time he speaks about it, it gets less and less. So that's why, we need to make sure we reach out and we advocate for ourselves, because it does. And then he said that maybe it could be done in the future, but not right now. He's not going to do it.
Yeah. So we have to do our best to hold him accountable to all of this.
I'd maybe also just add that, Joe Biden is a politician, folks. He can be pushed. A year ago, Joe Biden almost literally laughed me out of the room at the notion of returning bankruptcy protections to student loans. Well, here we are a year later. He's included bankruptcy and even promised loan cancellation since over the past year. So things are changing quickly on this topic, and how hard we fight right now really makes a huge difference with the body politic.
It certainly does, because we're the ones who elect them and we have to hold them accountable.
Exactly.
So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate your participation and willingness to be a part of this event and sit and listen. And we do hope that, you walk away with at least a little something, some new information, something that is helpful for you all from this event. So if you want to keep up and stay informed about student loans, you can follow us on social media, as well as keep up with our website. So many great articles and resources are kept up to date on there. And then also we do have a survey that Tamika is going to drop in the chat for us. And it's just a brief survey so that we can gauge, how you're feeling about the event and stuff, so that hopefully this can be a continuous thing for student loan justice. And then also we will drop the link to the petition in the chat as well, to where you can sign that petition if you haven't already, to push Biden to sign to cancel within his first 100 days by executive order to cancel student loan debts, or at least put bankruptcy protection on those. So we are going to drop those in the chat for you right now. And then again, thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's hold on. Get these links for you guys. That is the survey link, and then here is the petition link. So again, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.